Greetings and welcome to another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, Secrets and Recipes. Remembering that all is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond the veils. For it is all just an illusion and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. It's family reunion season. It's family reunion time. Come on in. Come on in, one. Come on in, all. Welcome, welcome, international listeners, my viewers from YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Periscope. Come on in, blog, talk radio, area code 845-277-9143. 845-277-9143. When you're ready with your question, comment, or request, do press the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Come on in. Welcome, greetings, and salutations, one and all. Welcome, welcome in the chat on both platforms, StreamYard as well as Blog Talk Radio. Greetings, greetings, and salutations. Soulmates, soulmate friends, soulmate twins, soulmate families. Come on in for this reunion today, y'all. It's family reunion time. How many people have a tradition of acknowledging family reunion in the middle of July every summer? Greetings, Lakeithia, beloved cousin. Greetings and salutations. We need to talk like today. Like today. Shortly after the show, today. If that's possible on your schedule, please. All is a blessing. Welcome, welcome. Greetings. Greetings and salutations, one and all. Welcome, welcome. Coming back to you. Yes, immediately, like right after. And you have my number, right? You just call me like shortly thereafter, like 15 minutes after the show. Welcome, welcome, greetings and salutations. Welcome, welcome, welcome. K-Do, K-Do. Bawoni. I appreciate all of my listeners, locally, nationally, internationally. I'm indeed grateful for your participation, your love, your support. I honor and acknowledge my fans, for indeed without you, I would not be where I am in this moment in time space. So indeed for you, I also show a great deal of gratitude and respect. Come on in. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your listenership, your support, your love, your critiques, your criticisms, your advice. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Another episode in another year of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, Secrets and Recipes. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Since December 23rd, 2008, been doing this daily broadcast at high noon, U.S. Central Standard Time. Greetings, S. Marie, welcome, beloved, beloved. Martha Martinez, all is truly and indeed a blessing. Craig Burns. It does feel that way, doesn't it? Eshu Alegbuana Ko Siwere. Awo onlo uto ni iwo, ada afanbo osi, o batala mi ita ni ebo onilo abane shu. Eshu is a respected elder who flogs, confronts, and uncovers fools. That one versed in mysteries uses truth to own you. He causes scatter to feed poverty. Obatala shakes rascals to have sacrifice. The owner of warnings is the one who is Eshu, Aboru, Aboye, Aboshishe, Ashe. May I ever reach your rune. May I ever be accepted. May I ever allow what we desire to come to pass. And so we say Ashe. Greetings and salutations. Indeed, it does feel like a long time. It's weird how that happens. Divine all blessed greetings and salutations. You are now sitting live with the Divine Prince, Pan-African Spiritualist, Practitioner, author, and advisor, actor, cultural performer, activist, grassroots community organizer, Elagoon, Oloye, Hoodoo, Obeya, Bokua, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist perspective. And of course, I'm joined by my beloved cousins, my cousin, Chief Priest Baba Awo, Oloye Ifawole, Oladeji, Efuntade, who is the Chief Priest of IleIfaOladeji, Inner Consciousness Spiritual Center in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and also my beloved cousin Otun, Ifatomiwa, who is the owner and creator of Armoredingrace, the administrator for Armoredingrace. And indeed, I'm always honored and grateful by my family, especially on an episode dedicated to family reunions. I'm always honored and grateful. Lakita Mims, thank you, and grateful for another family member. My mother, Evangelist Gary Voncel Savage, my sister Wapani Savage, my nephew Chef, my master chef nephew Tink. I'm always grateful indeed when my blood family comes through. But then I'm also grateful when my spiritual family comes through. Chef Bougie, one Orisha, the beloved Orisha, our Shemafia Rothschild. Yes, one Wapani, beloved one Wapani. And so many others who continue, Martha Martinez, who have and continue to support and show love and appreciation and unity. Alexis Williams, when we need it the most. And so I ask that you continue on with your endeavors as it might relate to our beloved sacred space, Congo Square. Continue on with your endeavors to keep this issue in front of the face of our beloved mayor, Cantrell. Some of the locals call her Aunt Titi. So please keep it in front of her by email, by your beloved creative viral videos, you know, and make sure you tag the mayor, make sure you tag the city council, make sure you tag Representative Troy. Let me get my notes in front of me before I start calling out names and have my verbiage all jacked up and crazy. And of course, things aren't always where they need to be. Cedric Richmond, for sure, Senator Troy A. Carter of Louisiana State Senator, District 7. Make sure that these great and powerful and connected individuals know the value of sacred space, the value of history and tradition and culture and lineage, and what it means to us as an international community. For indeed, this is a battle, this not just in my community, my literal physical community, the beloved historic Treme and Congo Square and Armstrong Park, But this is also about the city of New Orleans, about the history and tradition of Louisiana, about what America is or will ever be. And indeed, it is a global footprint. We have international tourism to this historic and ancient city, if you will, from all over the world, people who come and love on and appreciate on our city. So I'm grateful for those of you who have contacted by way of email, by way of phone, by way of video, and you tag these people. The at tag as well as the hashtag. Don't forget to at them. And you can find their profile on social media. TV's everywhere. Mary Cantrell is everywhere. Make sure you tag her to ensure that it's a courtesy to ensure that she sees and enjoys your post about staying out of Treme. Not just Congo Square, not just Armstrong Park, but staying out of Treme with any political, municipal, governmental, developments. So we certainly appreciate that. We appreciate family when family does what family is supposed to do, which is to love on one another, which is to support one another, which is to give wisdom and advice and share experiences, sometimes by way of humor, sometimes through the tears and the emotions, sometimes through heat and a little aggression, particularly when we've been told time and time again. But particularly when we're supposed to know better. So big auntie or big uncle or big mom or big papa might be a little bit more aggressive, the fourth or fifth time around. And of course, depending on what the infraction might be, is it a mistake or is it indeed something, that much more egregious? And how often do these questions, comments, requests show up at family reunions? We just here to have a good time, and to enjoy some food and drink, some music. We love to put on our old music. Don't let me start calling off names, y'all. The Isley Brothers and your Al Green and, the stuff that you and your parents and your grandparents might, be able to enjoy together. And it's always that family member or sometimes more than one family member that just has to open up the closets, just tell secrets, that just has to pick and prod, that indeed brings that unresolved, unhealed energy to the family reunion. Greetings, Mom. Peace and blessings, beloved. Yeah, it's been quite a morning for me. I'm really I digress. But thank you. Yes, thank you for being with us. Thank you, my beloved sister, One Wapani. It is indeed a family reunion here virtually, but also in the cosmos. Many of us celebrate family reunions, get-togethers during those summer months. Sometimes they're connected to Juneteenth or, July 4th. But indeed, a great deal of the summer month don't have, organized holidays per se. So we make our holidays and we want to get away from the summer heat, depending on where you live, what part of the world you live in. And we want to get out and enjoy the beach and get on the highways sometimes and tour other regions. And of course, interconnect with family. And there's always that family member or that group of family members that just don't want to comply with celebration and just having a good time. Or just can't have a good time without getting drunk and acting a fool. I've had funerals turned out. I've seen weddings turned out. And indeed, I've seen family reunions turned out. It's something about that energy. And I've always believed that it's more than just, love, connectedness, sometimes support. We like to say nurture, but sometimes you have family members, that you only see once a year or less, at your family reunion. So it's not always necessarily about direct nurture, shall we say. It could be more of an more of an ancestral nurture, from previous generations or previous connections. You know how you just connected to that uncle or that aunt that your grandma says is your uncle and your aunt, and you don't ask questions. They don't tell you a whole lot of things. You later on find out that, they're not your blood relative, or they was just a friend of the family, and in some cases with us who are doing DNA research, much more entertaining and interesting stories, who the mama really was, who the daddy really was. Greetings, Enzo Khalifa. Greetings, beloved. Nina Lloyd. I need to talk to you today as well, Nina Lloyd. After I talk with my cousin, Lakithia Mims, I'm going to talk to Nina Lloyd after the show, not very long after the show. So Nina Lloyd, 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, Nina Lloyd, if that's okay with you, beloved, just call me at 5 o'clock. Greetings, everyone who I have not acknowledged individually. We welcome you. And of course, on our phone lines, there's always many listeners on our phone lines at area code 845-277-9143, 845-277-9143. If indeed you have a question, comment, or request, do press the number 1 on your telephone keypad. This will allow me to open your mic and bring you into the conversation. We also have our chat box open on the blog, Talk Radio, BLOG, blog, talkradio.com /the-divine-prince. The chat box there is also open. And of course, we welcome you to utilize the scrolling banner at the bottom of the screen. Well, let me first copy and paste it and put it in the chat. And then I'll put it, scroll it at the bottom of the screen to allow you to co-host with us and come on with your webcam and mic with your questions, comments, and requests as we unpack, because our show topics always require some unpacking and perspective from at least 3 people, if not more, and unpack this topic of family reunion today on July 12th. So I want to allow my cousins in, the beloved Otun, Iya Otun. Welcome, and then we'll open Oloye Ifawole's mic after our beloved sister speaks. Come on in, Queen.
Oloye, Divine, Baba Oloye, and listening and watching family. I want to give honor to my Luo Prince Baba at the Ladona and Olori Ifatoyin, Iyalode, Ejenike Oyebola Ladona. It is indeed a blessing to be here. I have missed everyone, including my cousins. It's good to be back with you. I look forward to today's discussion. Ooh wee, family reunions. Mm-mm-mm. Let's get into it. This is definitely going to be interesting and full of love and laughter. And please don't feel if you're listening or watching that you have a family that's completely out of the ordinary. There is no story that I haven't heard. You can't shock us. Just, anything that resonates with you, we ask you to definitely like and subscribe to this platform. I have enjoyed being here. The discussions are definitely meaningful. It helps you dive deep if you're willing to do the work. And I look forward to discussing and continuing this conversation more.
On the slide, this show is an exercise in shadow work if y'all haven't already figured that out. But come on in, Oloye.
But she said to everyone, blessings. As we go into talking about family reunion, family period, of course, we can't deflect from the need of our ancestors. So I offer this Oriki Egun today. Egun mopeo, Egun peleo, Egungun kiki Egungun, Egun ashede. Morere ni ori egun. Eme mona kan eye ba ori egun. Adupe egun me. Ancestors, I call you. Ancestor, I greet you. We praise the power of the ancestors. The wisdom of the ancestors is here. Good fortune comes from the wisdom of the ancestors. When I do not know which road to follow, I will turn to the wisdom of the ancestors. I thank my ancestors. We say Ashe. So I give honor to all of you. I give honor to our ancestors. I give honor to all of the Ori, of all of those who are present today. And I pray today will be a beneficial day for each and every one of you, that you'll receive a blessing of good wisdom, new wisdom, things to take with you to elevate your own consciousness and your own level of knowledge. So blessings to everyone. Blessings to Mama Savage. Blessings to One Wapani. Blessings to all of you, all of my family here. God bless you.
Yeah, One Wapani is your cousin now, Otun and Oloye.
Hello, cousin.
Yes, indeed. Greetings, Daniette Gibbs. Welcome, beloved. All of our listeners who we cannot see, we certainly do appreciate you. We're grateful for you. Yes, Enzo Khalifa, Adope Egun Iri, Ashe. Yes, we thank you. We appreciate you, Matt Austin Bay. Greetings, beloved. Salam. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your day with us. Goat Rider, the Master Builder, we certainly appreciate you and all of you for being a part of this sharing. And again, we invite you. Don't make me beg, and certainly you don't want to see me be aggressive. One Wapani can tell you might not like my aggressive side, but please, don't make us beg you to participate, to join in, to ask questions, to indeed get on the phone lines. If your wig and your face ain't together, just get on the phone lines. We can hear you at 845-277-9143. And remember to press that 1 so I can see your hand raised, and I'll unmute your mic and bring you into the conversation. When I think even just about, I'm a meditator, if you all don't know that, haven't figured that out already. I love to meditate. I love mental mind exercises. Since a child, I love to use my imagination. It was something that my mother encouraged. In many ways, she demanded it. We weren't allowed to be quote unquote bored as children. Using that word out loud was like a magic spell, and it would cause mother to go into a particular range of behaviors. Probably top of the list was clean the entire house if you're bored. Let's clean blinds, and some of you may not be aware, we had metal blinds back then, that loved to collect dust and needed to be cleaned, frequently, baseboards, closets, crevices, no more boredom, when you're told by mom to clean the entire house from top to bottom, spring cleaning type cleaning from top to bottom. And then, there was the responses that she gave, which were a little bit more ethereal. Meditate. As young as 5, 6, just sit down, be quiet, be still, meditate. What does that mean to a child who hasn't had meditation explained to them in any great deal of detail? And for my new listeners, I was at the earliest Black spiritualist churches, Baptist Black spiritualist churches. And then we graduated, for lack of better words, into evangelical Christianity. So my mama wasn't necessarily, someone who talked about Buddhism or Hinduism or other cultural religious nuances from around the world. She just said, meditate, sit still, be quiet, think quiet thoughts, think peaceful thoughts, think positive thoughts. And then there was the response about find you something to do, find you something to do, find you something creative to do. So we learned how to take cardboard and brown paper bag and flour and water and paper mache and blow up balloons and paper mache them and create things and use our minds and use our imaginations. So I like thinking games, breathing, sitting still, breathing, and then picking very specific targets or very specific questions. And one of those is, what is your first memory? When you go back in your mind, when you still your random thinking and thoughts, and you can really get to that vibration in your frequency. What's your earliest memories? What do those memories involve? Indeed, if there's shadow work hidden there, that will rise up. And for those of you who are a bit more advanced in doing that work, you have an opportunity to heal, repair, fix, and renew. But for others, it might be positive. You might not necessarily have gray or shadow work lurking there, but indeed have memories that we forget, that we grow out of, that we grow beyond. Sometimes years stack up between, childhood and you're actively participating in these activities and remembering things that are good, that are positive, that turn certain frequencies on in your body, that turn certain frequencies on in your mind, in your spirit. One of my earliest ways of connecting with spirit was music and indeed the piano. And I have my mother and my sister Wapani here, to sort of witness that. I worked my frustration out, my anger out, my wonder out, my imagination out on the piano. I was hearing at a very young age, playing by ear, so I would hear a music, hear a song, and then I would mimic that, on the piano. Back then we had cassette recorders, and you record a song and play it over and over again, until I would get it, maybe 10 times, a dozen times before I would, get the song and be able to sort of repeat that. But even in that, going in and out of the harmonies, in and out of the frequencies, in and out of the rhythms, there's something that takes place in your mind while your hands are doing a very sort of mathematically orchestrated thing that allows you to go in and out of, space. And during that, it allows you to sort of deep dive into consciousness and memories, and thoughts. And indeed, if there's darkness there, that will surface to the top. But family reunions, we would like to believe, we would like to think that we can recall positive, happy times, the smell of cotton candy, the sound that you might hear in the background at an amusement park, or indeed at a family reunion, and what type of feeling does that bring up in you? Does that cause to sort of keep us connected and anchored, almost in a way that we identify archetypes with certain traditions and habits and things that we do, in our communities? I want to talk about that, from many angles, as we always do, and invite you all to please be a part of the conversation. Otun or Oloye, either of you, if you want to go first, please do. Craig Burns, yes, I do remote viewing, if that's what you're asking me. Go ahead, Oloye.
Family reunions. Otun, I owe you. Family reunions, I've had wonderful experiences with them. Growing up, as many of us did, we grew up in church. And so we would often have the church picnics. And back then, a lot of the churches were filled with family anyway. So it turned out to be a kind of a family reunion when you think about it, whether it was blood or whether it was just someone that we called and referred to as aunt and uncle and cousins and whatever the case might be. It was a way of getting to know them on a different place, a different way. And then dealing with the regular family reunions, having the opportunity to see people you haven't seen in many, many years, and as well meeting so many different people in the family. The other part to it is when when we go through all the marriages in the families, sometimes we lose sight on the different names that change. So sometimes we're not aware, or we don't realize that this person might be a cousin because it's not a recognized name in the original, from the original names. Doing this through ancestry.com and finding so many family members has been a unique and divine experience. Having the opportunity to meet people in so many different walks of life, it is kind of amazing because, let's be honest, when you do the ancestry DNA and you find people, it could go left or it could go right. It could go up or down. And I've been blessed that for myself, my personal experience has been a wonderful experience. I can't go into this thing too deep, but I've met very close family members now that I never in my life, after being 875 years old, thought that I would have the opportunity to meet. So I just, I myself have had a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful blessing come my way in, getting to know, and even through Facebook, there's ups and downs with everything that we do. Yeah, we know we're being watched all the time through Facebook. They're watching us. They're watching what we post. They're doing all that. We all know that. But also, the opportunity to stay in contact with friends who I consider family, that will, we've known each other since we were 5 and 6 years old, started school in kindergarten together. And here we are, older and with our own families. So, so, we look at the family reunion. It could be done in a variety of different ways. Friends that you've known forever and have stayed close, that to me is family. Family, blood, of course, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, and then also those who we were introduced to as uncles and aunts and such, and how they, in their children, they've become our cousins and all of that. So I've had a wonderful opportunity, so it's all good.
Yeah, that's probably my greatest value from Facebook, to be quite honest. And I'm serious. As humorous as it might sound, is the family reunion element. Particularly for me, after having, literally disappeared off the map for some of my family for 10, 15 years, in some cases 20 to 30 years, and them not knowing if I was alive or dead, or where I was, or what exactly I was doing. Family Union really became Facebook for me, a place to sort of see, children that had been born long after I've left, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, children born, many years after I've left those cities that I've only seen because of Facebook and social media. Because we understand Facebook owns more than just Facebook, it's everywhere. So we might as well say social media. And seeing them grow up, seeing them graduate, seeing them get married, seeing them go into the military, seeing them have babies and children of their own, and seeing that almost in real time on Facebook, for me, has been a very, very beneficial and even to some degree unifying thing. I think some things that a particular generation in your family, maybe those are just a little bit older than you, have a way of seeing the world. But then those just a little bit younger than you have a different sort of way of seeing the world. And I think in indigenous cultures, particularly in West Africa, they sort of understood that intricately because we were sort of handled according to age groups. So, there's a different degree of how they view and see the world. So those younger generations, cousins, nieces, nephews, etc., who grew up watching me in social media, have a very different connection to our material, to voodoo and Black spirituality and religion and Egyptology than maybe some of our older family members do. But then indeed there are older members, like my mother, for instance, who have evolved their own thinking, who can integrate, some of our information into their own worldview without it being a dramatic conflict, a reason to upset the picnic table, and still manage, to exist in a reality that's in balance, that's peaceful. I think the family reunions are symbolic of not just what unifies us and what we remember collectively, what we reminisce about, those shared moments in time, but indeed those mistakes, those marriages. When Oloye mentioned marriages, I just smiled, behind my little face mask there, because wow, what lessons have we learned just by way of marriage, or what lessons should we have learned just by way of marriages, within the dynamics of our families, considering all the requests for love and relationships, and fix my marriage, and fix my, baby daddy, and fix my baby mom, and what lessons did we learn and should we have learned, through that. I was a curious child, like many of you, I'm sure. So when the family came together, they would try and isolate the young people from the older. I grew up in a 3-story house, so the basement was adult party zone, if you will. We had a full bar, full refrigerator down there, and of course access to the backyard and grilling or whatever from down there. And then the children were upstairs in the main floor, if you will, with a living room and a TV, in the kitchen and the dining area where the food was, but separate from, the cussing and the smoking and the drinking, and the bid whist and the pinochle. I don't know if y'all even know nothing about that. Bid whist and pinochle, was being played, and the dominoes, was being played. And I would find, I knew all the spots in my house to listen. Almost like prison. There were certain, heat and air conditioning ducts in the house that would carry sound all the way from the basement. I knew, me and Wapani, come on Wapani, we knew exactly where they were, and we would listen. Yeah, we knew where the crevices were where you could hear. And I would listen and observe and, take in, and of course your parents always think, they've got it covered and they've kept you safe from the adult things, and oh, well, they don't know what we're talking about, or they don't know what, we always knew what was going on. It's intuitive, it's indeed spiritual, it's biological, but we were just crafty, and curious, as kids. So learning about how people get along, how adults get along or don't get along, and how breakdowns ultimately become cancerous and toxic, to end up becoming shadow work for somebody to have to deal with, but for the next individual to have to process. It's just a powerful, exciting, kind of spooky experience, to go through, particularly as a young person. And then having so many questions about what does this all mean, really. There were the events that we had where, Christmas, the surprise birthday party, where family would come in from out of town. So it's not just, your local, adult party crew, but your aunt, your uncle, maybe your grandma or grandpa coming in from out of town, which would lend a whole nother dynamic of energy, to the gathering, to how people would behave, and or would not behave, depending on the occasion. And the spirits was always around. I don't mean just the A goons, y'all. I mean the J and B, the Jack Daniels. The spirits would always be around, and people would get loose, and at a young age, I would then see spirits come in and go out. And listen, I see the same thing in church, y'all. So it ain't just the liquor element. Seeing spirits come in and go out of these gatherings, and enter a person, and sometimes get passed around, the room. You having a great time, and it's a couple over there that's going back and forth. And before you know it, the one sister girl sitting next to him is trying to shush them down. But don't you shush me, and now she's caught up, and that spirit then sets off like a fire. We see it at parties, how these spontaneous sparks of energy, show up at a party, and before you know it, unfortunately, depending on what city in America you live in, Chirac, you running and ducking and hiding, and I don't want to pick on Chirac either, because New Orleans has its own degree of problems too. We're just a much smaller city geographically, a much more confined community. So there's a different dynamic to eldership and leadership, and who are the patriarchs and matriarchs and sergeant at arms sometimes of the community. And we first learn those roles in the families. And we first see those roles sometimes in a way that we don't quite get to see in our little intimate, familiar spaces with our own close relatives, but in a dynamic when it's at that family reunion. Mom or dad might act a little differently in front of their mother in the presence of a group, might perform a little differently in front of their brothers or sisters in the presence of a group, and indeed, we would like to think we would all want to just have a great time and be on our best behavior. But there's always going to be somebody who's going to ask that question, bring up that topic, bring up that subject matter that seems to light a fire of ancestral energy, in family reunions. That can, like my cousin said, indeed go left or right. I think the ancestral DNA journey is much like being an adopted child, where you really don't know, but you're looking and you're in search of, and now you're getting access to information that you've never seen before. And then you've got to process that, well, what does this now mean? Who is this and what does that now mean? We have a certain guard that we put up to quote unquote strangers and the unknown, especially in virtual space, especially on the internet, especially in social media. For some people, you are no more real than your avatar, than your profile. They don't bother to call you outside of the internet. They don't care to meet you off social media. You're no more real than your profile. But I think when you bring the DNA element into it, the profile now has sort of a bit of an identity attached to it, that's somehow attached to your identity by blood, and it gives it a whole nother feeling, Oloye. I don't think that makes people necessarily any more or less friendly or favorable than they would be under normal circumstances, but I do think it adds another degree of thought to the process of how they're going to respond or not respond when they do get that information. Like you, I've had great experiences with Ancestry.com as well as 23andMe in terms of meeting, virtually meeting family members, and it going well. The conversation, even if we didn't have all the answers. I have met some and we had no idea how we're related, still can't figure it out. Still don't know who was married to who and had what child, how we ended up being, second, third cousins. But as I said just a moment ago, because of who we were as personalities, things went well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the DNA just kicks in, and it's a pleasant conversation. It's a peaceful conversation. Sometimes it's multiple conversations. It's a continued conversation built on curiosity and interest and respect, and at some point, maybe even love and admiration. But then there are those cases like Lakithia, for instance. I know Lakithia's family. Haven't met Lakithia face to face yet, but I've met her mama and many other members of her family. So it's a very different knowing when you come across her name, in your DNA results, for me. And of course, again, the connection is positive, lively, curiosity, respect, interest, and a sense of familiar connection. But I think, again, after being exposed to DNA technology, that we indeed interact with many people in the course of our lives who are either connected to us directly by way of blood or DNA, and we don't know it, or by way of spirit DNA connection.
Sometimes when I look on my list, I get real confused because it says from both families, and then I'm trying to figure out how this particular cousin that I've grown up with is in the family of a family that I've never. I just, it's very interesting. What do they say? There's seven degrees of separation. Is that what they say?
6.
So how many?
7 degrees of separation.
6.
Right.
No, it's 7, I think. I'm willing to be wrong, Otun, but I think it's 7.
It's one of those degrees of separation, and it's not that's not a big degree. So when we find people who all of a sudden turn out to be a cousin through another cousin that you didn't even realize there was this connection, it's pretty amazing, And yes, when we think about even when we think about those families that were coming from the enslaved families, we know that after slavery had ended, then many were moving off the plantations to different places because they did not want to stay in that area. So they would be migrating. And we had what we say the big migration, right? So that big migration coming from wherever, South Carolina, North Carolina, wherever they migrated from, into Virginia, moving upward and up into New York and Chicago and all of those big cities in hopes of being able to begin new life. But yet inside of that, again, we had the marriages and some marriages didn't work out. And so now we don't know how this family relates to that family, but we do know that this person is said to be a second or third or fourth cousin. So somewhere down that line in all that travel, then, we have family that we don't even know that we have all throughout the country. So, it's a very interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, I'm wrong. Oh, because the queen is always right. Otun, it's 6 degrees.
Oh, she gave you that look.
Yeah, it is 6. My apologies, beloved. And depending on where you are, that number goes down. We swear it's 1 or 2 in the city of New Orleans. 3 at the most. Again, it's really not a big place. For those of you who don't quite get it, oh wow, Annapolis, Maryland, Gary, Indiana. These are cities that are much bigger than New Orleans. By design, we look big and we're a little spaced out because of nature and the Mississippi River and sort of that crescent shape that we have inherited here. But it's a very small place. Typically, if you know a person, your mama or your sister or brother, chances are, might know a person, or your neighbor might know, that person. But it's a much smaller degree, I believe, than 6, even here in the city. So geography, I do believe, plays, a role. But even when I think back in my past life, when I never lived anywhere more than 90 days, and I was always on the move, nationally, always on the move. I would meet people in California and then run into them in New York. Meet people in New York and then run into them in Chicago. Run into them in Dallas. Run into them in Florida. So there's also a spiritual, way of viewing this, the degrees of separation. I think that, as you would expect in the realm of spirit, transcends time and place, and indeed spirit. Some of you might want to call that, say, God, can have a person, place, or thing show up and be present at its will, when it pleases, when it so well chooses. And if we indeed are God, reflections of God, then we too indeed have the ability to create and recreate the reality that we so seek, that we so choose in any given moment in time space, right here in this present moment in time space. How we learn to deal with conflict, how we learn to deal with sometimes aggression, how we learn to deal with fear, all things that we begin to sort of learn and develop as children, and individually, but of course through the dynamics of family and family relationships and family demonstration, and how we see things sort of worked out and demonstrated. What things are rewarded and applauded within the dynamics of the family and the family reunion. How do you spend your family reunion? There was a Tyler Perry movie, and I can't remember which one because they all sort of blend together for me. But there was a Tyler Perry movie. I know Cecily Tyson was there. She was the oldest family member.
Family
Uh,
reunion.
okay, family reunion. And, and that was one of the issues that they explored. What was the real value of the family reunion? Indeed, is it a party? Is it a celebration? Is it a time to get together and do sort of crazy and salacious, and crazy things? Is it a time to show respect? Is it a time to learn and sit at the feet and the knees of the elders, and absorb their wisdom and absorb their story, and absorb their experiences? And I think when we think about ancestors, we ask those same questions. And so indeed, when we think about the family reunion, I post a lot of second line culture in my TikTok. So my second line is my most popular thing in TikTok. Um, and so people often ask, is it respectful? Is it a party? If I'm just driving by and I stop and get out of my car and start dancing, is that seen as a respectful thing? If I'm in town as a tourist and I see a second line going by, is it respectful for me to join in? I get asked those questions almost every day, multiple times a day. I have one video, I think 350,000 views, of a second line in my neighborhood. And so I say, yes, it's all those things. It's a place to show great respect, great reverence. We honor, acknowledge the life, the spirit, the soul, if you will. Not necessarily the body. We don't necessarily, pull the body out and parade the body, though that has been done in historic second line culture. Oh, you're gonna make me tell the story of Uncle Lionel, baby. Uncle Lionel was a legend in New Orleans, was a legend in Treme. His image is painted on many monuments, many buildings throughout the city. His photo is easy to pull up. At his funeral, they had Uncle Lionel like this, baby. With a cane on time. No, like this, fool. with a cane, standing up, propped up, no coffin, the body standing up. It's legendary. It'll be in the record books of death culture, funeral culture for New Orleans forever. Oh yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's more than dancing on the caskets, because I know you've seen those videos where we dance on the coffins, dance on the caskets. They'll parade the casket through the street, you know, along with the brass band, you know, along with umbrella carrying, you know, second line family, friends, and of course people who hear the brass bands coming, who feel the drums coming through the floor and run out of their houses, and then to join, you know, the procession. And it's done in respect, it's done in honor, it's done to acknowledge the life, the soul, and so again, not so much the body per se, but the soul of the individual. And so we celebrate. Oh yeah, and there'll be rolling vendors pulling, you know, coolers on wheels full of champagne and beer and cold drink.
I'm with all of that, and I feel that it is good to get in the mindset of a celebration of someone. But I'm gonna tell you right now, you prop somebody up on a cane, and I'm doing an about face, because that is where my celebration ends. And I can respect all of that. That it, you know, there are some that enjoy that, and I respect all of that. I'm not taking anything away, but because I will dance and shake my shimmy right up until the entrance, and then I'm turning right back around is propping folk up is where I draw the line. I will send my love and well wishes and wave you right on through the door while I wait outside. I don't do the propping. Once you get the propping, I'm out. But I will dance with you and do all of that stuff. I don't do the proppage. Sorry. But I can respect that. Absolutely.
I
No,
thought that
sir.
might, I thought that might be a little bit more entertaining than the drive-through funerals. But the drive, well, that's new. That's COVID season. So they have a huge bay window, which many funeral homes have anyway, if you think about it. And now they put the coffin right in front of the window and set up the flowers, and you drive through, you know, or walk through the driveway and look at the body. But that's new. That's COVID pandemic new. But you know, family reunions, funerals, you know, one is light, one is darkness, one is Papagede, one is Baron Samedi, one is a bit mournful, and the other's about celebration and the newness, if you will, of life. Because the second line sort of celebrates a newness that comes with the transition, you know, of the body into the death world, but the spirit returning to the spirit realm, you know.
You
Yeah,
know, a
yeah. Well,
major part of our culture anyway is to, you know, a lot of other cultures revel in how we go through our funerals and transitions. Uh, right. And you know, in from our culture, from our tradition, of course we mourn the physical loss of a person, but for us it's a celebration of their transition to a higher realm of being. We know we're celebrating that there's no more suffering, no more pain, no more hurt, no more of the things that they've had to face here on a temporal plane. But now they're in an elevated status in Olorun, in heaven, to be able to be there with us every single step of the way. So whenever we wake up in the morning, we are them. And when we give honor to them, then we start seeing them work different, you know, different things in our lives. And so, you know, it reminds me, and I'll paraphrase this because I want to make sure it's correct. And that is, you know, that we a person is never fully dead if you keep their name alive, you know. So when we keep our ancestors' names alive, we are always keeping the things of their life alive. You know, not to go back into a theological, thing, but when we look at it, a lot of Christian people do not truly understand from the standpoint of they are following an ancestral tradition. As far as I know, there's nobody still alive from Bible days, and if they are, then I'd like to see them and meet them myself. But as far as I know, they've all made their transition, but yet we still call their names. We still honor and acknowledge the contributions that they have laid out. We honor the conversations and the messages that they receive from God, and we learn from their lessons of either being obedient or not being obedient. And then we find then that all of these messages go to us today in how we should operate in our decisions, in our choices, in our walk with spirit. So when I look at that, and I even look at Islam the same way, they don't, because they don't acknowledge ancestry at all. And many Christian denominations don't either. But the bottom line is, when you're calling Musa and you're calling Ibrahim and you're calling all of the different prophets, you are honoring and acknowledging their contribution. Therefore, they are ancestors, and you're acknowledging them. You're venerating their experiences here on this earth.
But I also think, cousin, if I can interrupt just a moment.
Yeah.
Also, when you think about the different branches of Islam, it's everything to do with lineage, bloodline. When you think of, Mustafa, Ibn or Ibra usually means son of somebody, the son of somebody. So they say on one side of they mouth that it's not about lineage and heritage and tradition, but on the other, they're almost just as lineage based as the Old Testament. The 5 books of Moses are, in terms of who begat who and who was born of whom. Who's a blood relative to Muhammad, who's a blood relative to Jesus Christ. And it's created the Sufis versus, the other, for some reason I'm drawing a blank on the various different denominations of Islamic, tradition. But I believe it has everything to do with who's the son of whom and family bloodlines, family connections.
Isn't that the way we used to introduce ourselves anyway? We used to introduce ourselves as, my name is such and such. And as soon as you get that out your mouth, somebody might know, but they're still going to ask you who your people is. And as soon as they ask you and you start going down, my mother was so-and-so, my father so-and-so, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, then automatically they're like, I know that line. Yes. So and the part about the Old Testament, that's what Islam was based on. So I'm not surprised that it has that, because in Judaism, they have that as well. But it's interesting that all 3 of the Abrahamic faiths have this struggle or challenge or problem with their followers honoring their ancestors and being told that is not appropriate. It is not something that you're supposed to be doing. So
Sunni, can you hear me?
Yes, Sunni.
The Sunni, the Shia, which of the believers of Muhammad chose a successor, Ali Ibn, which means the son of Abi Talib, his son-in-law. You have Ibadi, another lesser-known branch of Islam. This denomination predates Sunni and Shia and is considered a highly orthodox version of Islam. And then you have Ahmadiyya. This denomination is newer than the previous, followers of Adamiya do not recognize Muhammad as the last prophet. You have Sufism. The majority of Sufis follow the Islam direction as given by Ali, Muhammad's successor, as believed by Shia. So there is a degree of, some of the same lineage-based, family-based structuring in Islam that you see in Christianity. And I often say that they're really different sides of the same coin, in my opinion, Islam and Christianity. Also, while I got a moment, I wanted to acknowledge before I forget, Enzo Khalifa, mediumship, also made a comment I think is really important. Just as important as doing ancestor work and divination, just as important as getting your DNA work done is family tree.
Mm-hmm.
I like to, also say that in another way. We're not asking enough questions, and we're not writing enough things down.
Mm-hmm.
We're not asking enough questions, and we're not writing enough things down. Because that's how you get to family trees. A lot of information gets compiled only when the obituary is being formulated.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to figure out, who was the mama, who married who, how many kids that, so-and-so have, how many siblings, and we cram that all sort of into the obituary. But there aren't many other exercises in the course of our regular, ongoing lives that we stop to compile that kind of information, unless you're doing like a family tree.
Mm-hmm.
And the sooner you get started, the better. The sooner you can ask the oldest members of your family, that you can reach out to, that you can contact, the sooner the better. Again, they're the oldest members. They're moving on to a room. They're moving on to the next destination shortly. So you want to get as much information from them as possible.
And don't get discouraged, because some of them, for whatever reason, do not like talking about, they don't like talking about that stuff. But if you get discouraged by them not really wanting to talk about it, then you'll still never get the answers. So don't be discouraged if in the beginning you're having a hard time getting the information from those elders. And a lot of them, they simply don't remember, because they didn't think it was important for them to remember, maybe, in regard to that,
In some cases, it's still shadow work. And I'm not trying to be disagreeable, cousin, so forgive me. But in some cases, it wasn't important. I didn't remember that. But I think, too, especially when I think about ancestors, older people, the 1960s, to maybe 1900. They lived under great trauma, great oppression, the lynching season, having whole communities burnt to the ground, whole houses and whole families burnt out of their livelihoods and out of their realities. Racism, sexism, overt discrimination, public displays of hate, and degradation. And indeed, our enslaved ancestors endured a great deal worse, for sure. But just to keep it in context with what we're dealing with, those who are alive right now and under the sound of our voice, and maybe my mother's generation, maybe my oldest client's generation. My oldest client is 86 years old. So maybe her generation, and think about that degree of quiet and silence that they were sort of first trained into, because that's just what you did back then. People didn't air their dirty laundry. People didn't talk about personal things, intimate things, things that were upsetting. I think there's a certain American thing that led to, especially when I think of the 50s, this sense of America being sort of this utopia and the perfect families, and no one wanting to look like they had less than their neighbor or look like they were doing worse off than their neighbor. You might say the beginnings of materialism. You might say the beginnings of, So our hyper labor-oriented culture. But let's go back some generations. The wars, World War I, World War II. Our grandparents who had to suffer, who had to go without, who had to recycle before we knew what recycling was, who had to survive. My grandmother could pinch a penny. My mother's mother could pinch a penny until Lincoln Howland, literally, and had the properties, to prove it, to demonstrate it. I'm not so much sure about the savings, but certainly the properties, the land value, to sort of back up that practice of hers. So it's a lot of reasons I think that generation in particular kept quiet. Now, when you think of maybe the '60s onward to today, as a culture, and again, we're talking about here in the U.S., because if we look at Africa, Asia, different regions, we might think a little bit differently in terms of this timeline. When people, generally speaking, found their voice, felt safe saying certain things in public, felt safe talking about certain things, in public. Sex, for example, we know sex has always been a taboo thing in the family conversation in America. That's not quite the same thing in the UK or Africa or other places of the world, and particularly when we go back to the '50s or earlier. We know places in Africa and other regions of the world, various stages of undress, comic performances, theatrical, spiritual, religious performances involving nudity, and it was just a completely different feel of that, as opposed to here in the U.S., which is, was based on religion. They claimed to be free in religion, brought religion with them, then created a society that's been based on religion. The Mormons, the Catholics, the Protestants, the evangelicals, it's been about religion really from day one. And so therefore that has affected our cultural demonstrations, and particularly out in the public, out in the open. And the unfortunate reality is that when we think out in the open now, we have to think Black, white, we have to think Asian, Indigenous American, if we talk about the US. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense, old time? We have to think in that way, as opposed to when in our homes, in our communities, we're thinking about us, and then the demonstrations, that were presented, to us. Am I
think,
rambling or are you with me? Come on,
um,
Otun.
oh no, I absolutely agree. I also would like to suggest, I know that um, each of us have our own family quirks, if you will. Every family has its secrets, things they didn't want to talk about, things they didn't want brought out in the open, as you said, things that were taboo to discuss outside of the household. However, we are in a day and age where a lot of us are seeking information. And as you mentioned, it is part of doing your individual shadow work as far as getting your family information, doing the family tree is critical because it's coming a time where a lot of people, especially the younger generations, are not only wanting to see where they're going, but they're wanting to have a clear understanding of where they come from. And so there are no more room for the secrets because all of those secrets do is cause the later generations to struggle to discover who they are. So my suggestion to those either watching or listening, some of us are coming up on maybe family reunions or they're planning them or in the planning stages, rather, of a family reunion. And my suggestion is if you're looking to be a part of that, or if you've been wondering how you can add to that, this is your opportunity to do so. Start speaking to some of your elders, do a little family research, start putting together a family tree. Maybe have some kind of either event or a segment in the family reunion where you present the elders with the fruit of your labor, which is a family tree, and you have the information. And then maybe every year thus forward, as the family comes back together, the new additions, the marriages, the children that are birthed, you add them to the family tree. So at that function, they are being acknowledged, they are being recognized, and you have a whole line, and everyone in that family can either take a picture of that family tree for their own records, or maybe there are printouts that you can hand out at the family tree. So everyone has a copy, so everyone can have an understanding of where they come from. Do some research, and I can guarantee you, even if this is something that may be wanting to be done as a labor of love, I can promise you, young people out there, if this is something that you want to get into and this is something that you want to produce, the elders of your family will not only feel extra love and appreciation, but that will also open the gateway for you to be able to sit at the feet of some of those elders who maybe didn't feel that their knowledge was appreciated or sought after. This can be the bridging, the reconnections for those areas that was broken, those areas where there were no strong ties. You can build that bridge because you need your elders so you can get your history and know where you're coming from. So that way you know how to conduct yourselves, what you need to seek, where you need to improve, so you can understand where you're going. It is an opportunity not just for learning and growth, but to solidify the foundation in which you have come. So I suggest very strongly, not just the family tree, but these are some activities, or maybe hopefully this will spark an idea in someone. So that way, at your function, or if you're planning a family reunion, these are things that will become commonplace. These are things that will become, in essence, ritual, because this is what we need, not just in my family or yours, but in all of the families of color across this nation, because this is how we begin to connect, reconnect, elevate those ancestors and get those connections and blessings that help push us forward, and maybe break some of those generational curses and get some of that shadow work done and completed, not just for yourself, but maybe for ancestors that needed that veneration and upliftment. There are so many opportunities there, and I really hope and pray that someone takes advantage of that, because those are very, very good opportunities, not just for you, but for your children and future generations to come.
I agree. And indeed, it is a shadow work trigger. Indeed. Because when you start asking questions, well, for example, because our audience likes examples, Big Mama, what is your earliest memory? Grandmama, Grandpapa, what's your earliest memory? What do you remember about your childhood? Tell me about the neighborhood you grew up in. You know, tell me when you learned how to hunt, when you learned how to fish, when you learned how to sew, when you learned how to paint, when you learned how to create. Tell me about those moments. And so, yeah, it's a shadow work trigger for your elders, for those older members of our family, who, as Otun and Oloye suggested, may not remember, may have forgotten certain things, either about trauma or just neglect, and so you are going to sort of push them down memory lane. I love to ask my mama, what were you doing during the 60s when this was happening and when that was happening? My mom was in college, at the particular arena of time I'm thinking about in my mind. And, what were you doing or not doing? And how did that affect you? And of course, Tulsa, I'm sure that's a question that's asked. I would hope that's a question that's asked among families, who have some kind of root or history, to Oklahoma and to that region. Is it Greenwood in that community? What do you remember? What were you told? We know that this may have been swept under history's carpet had it not been for people asking exactly those questions. What do you remember? What can you tell me about your childhood? What can you tell me about, your history, your growing up, your parents, your grandparents? What do you remember, about them? So these are questions we ask ourselves, but these are also questions that are very useful in asking people in your family as you try and solicit, information. Grandma, what do you remember about my mother or father when they were a child, when they were dating, when they were a teenager? What can you tell me about my parents that maybe my parents didn't tell me? And some of y'all's grandparents shady. So they gonna tell you some stuff, you know, that your parents ain't never told you. You know, your cousins might tell you some stuff. You know, y'all sharing, you know, your first exotic flower, you know, and your cousin might share something with you, you know, that your parents may have never told you before about the family. So even just having a mindset that's ready to receive, literally and figuratively, from people in your family, but also from divine and spiritual intervention from your ancestors, knowledge and information and connection to our families, you know, and allow it to just enter, you know, this mainstream world that we now exist in. We absolutely can push what we want, an agenda, a lifestyle, a way of being, a way of thinking, into reality right now that we want, that mirrors our best interests. Somebody said, who's we? This community, those listening under the sound of my voice. I don't care what your religion is, but indeed your cultural, ethno, spiritual practice, you know, we can indeed make ancestral worship and honor and practice as normalized as some of the things that we don't want, you know, that are happening right now in our lives. And we start in our families.
You know, one thing to consider with that too, I've had the opportunity over the last couple of days to be on Clubhouse. And in Clubhouse, there's a particular group that is so knowledgeable about our families within the Native American communities, and how some of the names that we think were European were not European. They are some of they're our names from some of the native communities. It was very interesting. I was listening the other day and knowing a couple of my names that were said to be Native American, come to find out that not only were they Native Americans, but they were some of the earliest and most senior people of the Saponi and the Chinnecock tribes or communities. And that really kind of got to me, because a lot of us are told that we have Native American in our family. A lot of us are told that we, you know, have this. Some from like Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, when I met him, he said that through the DNA, he is finding that 70-80% are not having Native American blood. But we also have to remember that well before slavery here in this country, we already had people here. African people were already living here. So therefore, they amalgamated with the Native American communities already. They had already intermarried with some of them. So now some of our DNA is showing maybe the origination of Africa too. And it might not show distinct Native American communities if they don't have a lot of people who had done DNA testing and all of that. So it was very interesting hearing these people, and then in knowing and giving them the names from knowing those particular communities, and them going right to all of the communities that had that name. They didn't just stay at Saponi. They gave like 5 and 6 other tribes for that one particular name. And as soon as I gave them the name for Shinnecock, to my surprise, in that particular last name came some of the most famous rappers. Chuck D, Flavor Flav, and a whole bunch of other people that they were mentioning. And I sat there in shock, because all of them were from the same family last name, from the Chinnecock. So
now, you know, I don't agree with that DNA part, but you are entitled to your own opinion. So I'm not.
I didn't make mention to my belief or disbelief. I just said what.
No, about the African, the part about there being Africans here before slavery. If they were African by genetics, that would show up in a DNA test. Biracial people, mixed race people, that would show up in the DNA test. That portion that is remaining from that alleged African ancestor, that footprint would still remain in the new generations that came after the intermarrying, intermixing. That footprint would still be visible.
I can give that to you, but we also have to consider that in like some of the other areas of the world, they might not have been considered as Native American per se, but like in mine, I know I had aspects someplace in South America and some of the other places that went right along with right along with it, that I knew that there were Native Americans, or Native people of those areas, even including the islands, because right, the indigenous people, because even from the islands, my original on my father's side were from Barbados. So we already know that there was a significant influence of Native people, but even if it didn't come up in DNA, we already know that there was the amalgamation of those people in the islands. So it might not specifically come up as a Native American per se, but native to those areas, they would still be possibly. I'm just saying possibly.
Yeah, we can take American out, the word American out, just indigenous. That indigenous blood from Canada to South America is going to show up separately in a DNA test from the African.
Correct.
Admix, whether it's more recent, meaning in the last 500 years, but even if we're talking 1,000 years ago, if indeed there were African, think of it, just like I said, take American out of it, take African out of it, and just say the indigenous people of that continent of Africa. It has a very specific genome, a very specific code. Just look at it from a mathematical perspective. So that footprint would still be visible. When you look at 23andMe, and I don't know how familiar you are with that site, you might understand it a little bit better because 23andMe goes back so much further. It goes back to Neanderthal. So if you're going back to Neanderthal, then that obviously predates slavery in the Middle Passage. And they're able to denote geographic regions where your ancestry would have been at that time, at a particular time in history. So to use myself as an example, I showed it on screen a few shows back. My earliest ancestors were indeed indigenous and Southeast Asian. And there's a clear distinction on 23andMe. Southeast Asian shows up, I want to say it's orange, and indigenous here in the Americas shows up as a yellow color on your test. And so if there was intermixing of those two, those numbers would show up in the DNA test. So the same thing with our quote unquote African-based ancestry. Now, cousin, remember I also did the show when I did look at the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnon and the different hominids predating quote unquote humans. And I showed you a series of pictures of dark skin. I'm comfortable with Black people. I'm comfortable with there were Black people in North America before slavery, before the arrival of slavery. I'm comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with there were Africans in North America prior to slavery, because that would be just like saying American, Russian. What happened to USSR? What happened to what they called it before that? So Africa, we know our ancestors didn't even call it quote unquote Africa.
That's
So when we
correct.
say Africa and then try and attach that, that attaches it really to the Middle Passage. So that's what I'm saying, that there just could not have been, genetically speaking, African people here before the Middle Passage, and that not show up on the DNA test. That would have to show up. Just like intermarriage, just like biracial, couples have children, and there's a footprint clearly representing both, representations of the blood lineage. And for the African American, I know you all don't like to hear this, but we 98% biracial. African Americans are 98% biracial. If you don't agree with me, you probably have not done a DNA test.
Yeah, my 23andMe shows both lines from what they will call, I guess, indigenous here, as well as my ties to Africa being around both times, because I have my earliest ancestries from, like, speaking like my great grandmother, my paternal great grandmother, like she was straight up, like she was listed through my family in our records. They said she was native, but bloodline wise, according to my DNA, she was a whole African, like 100%, not mixed, nothing. Now, when I look at the indigenous timeline, like you have said on my 23andMe, it's actually both. I got the Nigerian around that time, and I also have indigenous. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that because no, no, I think that because nobody was here to actually, none of us was here to actually witness it. I won't say that there was no Africans here because I wasn't here, but I know on my 23andMe test it's really dang close. It's really dang close. So I just say that, everybody, and, as far as their families and their migratory periods, going, coming, or not, is, specific to, whatever was going on within their community or their groups at that time. So I would say, just, just for the sake of leaving that an open opportunity and not shutting the door on the possibility, to say that it's very possible. I would just leave that as an
Listen,
open
I'll give you
possibility.
that. Honestly,
Woo!
I'll give you that. But at the same time, you're still supporting my response, because if your DNA test is able to demonstrate both African and other indigenous cultures sort of coexisting at the same time, if you will, then that would clearly show up in your DNA test if one intermarried with the other and had children. That would absolutely leave a footprint, on the DNA test. The scientists would be able to separate one originating from one portion of the world with another. And that's, for me, it's basic science. For me, as I say, I'm not trying to be disagreeable, especially with you all. I'm not trying to be argumentative, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I agree, Goat Rider. Goat Rider the Master says it's just not enough verifiable evidence for the Africans in America pre-transatlantic kidnapping. I agree, because if we use just the Olmec heads, for example, as a demonstration, where the rest of them? And where the rest of the heads? Where's the rest of that civilization? Who built the heads? Where's the rest of that community? If indeed we use that as the example of there being an African footprint. Now, it could indeed suggest maybe they've seen an African. Now, I'm particular about wording. Oloye said, "Well, I just can't really say that there weren't Africans in America." Perhaps, but if they started having babies, if they started intermarrying, now we're talking about a DNA footprint, which is different from just Africans being in the Americas. So they came and visit, they went back home. And we said, oh, wow, look at those Africans. And we carved Olmec heads. Okay, that might suggest something else, technology that we've lost contact with, a way of communicating, across the oceans that we've lost connection to. But when we start talking about genetics and DNA, that's a very different things. Enzo Khalifa says, yes, 23andMe haplogroup numbers reflect the early migrations and mutations of your maternal and paternal lineage. Yes, thank you for that. That's correct. So it will absolutely show a footprint for where your earliest maternal ancestor hailed from or originated from, and at what point the crossroad was created by way of, marriage, procreation. Goat Rider, the Master Builder, says the color map would bring to light why we look at indigenous peoples as Black African. We're talking about the color map in the DNA test. Am I reading that right?
Is he referring to like 23andMe?
There's an echo for some reason. Say that again.
Is he referring to the 23andMe color?
That's what I'm thinking. He's either referring to the 23andMe or the Ancestry.com. But my comment, Goat Rider, which you probably heard me say, was indigenous people were Black in many cases. If we look at tonation of skin, they had Black or dark brown skin. Because there are people listening to us right now who are going to say, well, you not Black, Otun ain't Black, Oloye certainly ain't Black, if we look at the color spectrum. But in terms of shading, there were indeed indigenous people darker than me. I think I'm the darkest one on the screen. There was certainly indigenous people darker than me with nappy hair that lived outside the continent of Mother Africa. So I would say those people were quote unquote Black. Those people were not African. African gave birth to humanity as a species, humans as a species. When we think about indigenous, we're not just thinking about indigenous humans, especially when we think about North America, South America, Asia, Australia. We have to then look at Neanderthals and other pre-human hominids. And so those pre-human hominids had dark skin in most cases. In some cases, they might have came close to Oloye, but in most cases, they was closer to me and Otun, and they did have from straight to nappy hair. Everything they got in the beauty supply store, they had, from straight hair to nappy hair. and so in that sense, the way we think as African Americans, because listen now, the way we think as African Americans, what's Black, what's African, is different from what a Nigerian might think as Black and African. It's different from what a German might think is Black and African. Let's be clear. Because the Nigerian is going to say, oh, I'm Yoruba. No, I'm Igbo. They know their family, they know their lineage. We don't like to say tribe. They can speak directly to that before they say nationality. Africa really denotes I live on the continent of. We don't call ourselves North Americans regularly. When we say they're African, that's like saying, oh, well, you're a North American. We're North Americans, right? Okay, but when we start talking about Black, skin tone, hair texture, okay, not culture, just skin tone, hair culture, then yeah, we could be looking at the indigenous people from all over the world. Now, if we start talking about culture, then then we narrow again our focus to really the Middle Passage and how we think as descendants of the Middle Passage about what Black and African and ethnicity is, which I saw my cousin Oloye nod his head, which is very different than how they perceive race, color, and ethnicity on the motherland, on the mother continent.
Well, they're unbroken. They're unbroken in lineage, unless it was those who came, during the time of the transatlantic. And we also have to remember, unfortunately, there were the wars between the communities, the tribes per se. And in that, those that were at war that captured people were the ones that were selling them to the captors. So therefore, those of us here, many of us, some of us, however we want to, say it, have again that broken lineage back there. And, to the particular tribes that have DNA, we can then say that, we are attached to these particular tribes. There's some people that have all the document for lineage, but yet they look at the DNA and it doesn't come up in specific as African. So, I guess it's just how you have to go about the study. I agree that not all Black people are African. We look at our brothers and sisters in Australia, and as far as I understand, they don't have African blood per se, but we know that the Aboriginals were people of color. So, my fault. I submit to that. I'm sorry. You're on mute.
Yes, if we want to nitpick, and some of us intellectuals in this community like to nitpick, if we want to talk about race, ethnicity, it gets very, very specific. And again, I keep singling out, Americas, because one, we're in America. I know some of you think this is a Nigerian produced show, and we appreciate that. We take that as a great compliment. But we live in America, so we have an experience that has been undoubtedly shaped by slavery, undoubtedly shaped by PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder, and all the traumas that come with that. So our vision, our focus early on, and has been programmed to be such: white, Black. The original, oppressing majority viewed the world as white and Black. That they weren't thinking about ethnicity. They weren't thinking about cultural nuances. You were either white or Black, and that was going to determine how they were going to treat us, how we were going to treat each other. And so when you look at Africa and other parts of the world, they don't necessarily have that Black-white way of viewing things. I remember, some 35 years ago, maybe having a Asian roommate who, let me make sure I get my ethnicities correct before I cause a problem, who was from Taiwan, but I introduced him to a room in my house that was full of Chinese stuff. And he was living day one. And I had no idea about Chinese history and how Chinese people had treated Taiwanese people in other, regions, around China, and what type of racial ethnic dichotomy, they would have. So he described, their relationship with the Chinese mainland, similar to, the quote unquote Black and white, discrepancies. So we have been taught to sort of view family and race and ethnicity primarily here in America through the dynamics of slavery. And so it makes opening our consciousness to a more universal international way of looking at things sometimes challenging for some people, and particularly with race and ethnicity. I got you, Goat Rider. Thank you for that. He said the map would show how skin color is based on the positioning of the sun. And I would agree with that to some degree, but even when you look at, again, the average Neanderthal that we see, you know, what are they, paintings, drawings, you know, not really real Neanderthals, but they typically don't look like how we presently identify whites or Europeans, you know, Canadians, North Americans, you know, of the lighter shade. So they still, when I look at the archaeological imagery, still have very dark hues, even black hues, but certainly weren't African, didn't have a tie back or a root to Africa. Well, thank you, Nina Lloyd. I got it. I understood. Yeah, it goes back far from the documentaries that I've seen, the science that I've looked at. You know, the tricky area for me is Australia, is Southeast Asia, and that part that begins to dip down south just a little bit, you know, but across the water away from the motherland. And so when I look at that on these archaeological demonstrations, whether they be videos, documentaries, and books, there's a name for, and I typically get it wrong, but I think it's Denisovians, which is another name like Neanderthal. It's another branch of pre-human hominids. And then there's another group that's just north of that, where Malaysian and some other ethnic cultural nuances are born from, but again, separate from Neanderthals, humans, and other hominids exist. So there was clearly a separate human development all over the world that was not human. So I should say a hominid that was not human. And then you had a hominid, and now we're learning more than one kind that was on the continent that originated humanity. The newest variety is in Northwest Africa. They don't even quite have a name for it, I don't believe yet. But they say it distinctly developed different from the previously known hominid that developed humanity in other parts of the continent of Africa. So we know that there were dark-skinned or black-looking people all over the globe, but everybody wasn't human until that intermixing began to create, you know, sort of the ethnic, racial nuances that we have come to accept today. So somewhere, especially on the 23andMe site, there's going to be a footprint. There's an algorithm for those ancestors that existed that predate slavery, that predate the Middle Passage, that predate colonization, that will for sure show up on your 23andMe test results. Let's see. Go right to the Master Builder says, speaking of family reunion, many indigenous tribes don't accept their African cousins. In many cases, we were slaves, thus the term freedman. But again, I think that speaks, to sort of what's in question here. Because I was going to first ask you, well, when you say indigenous, who are you talking about? But then you use the words tribe, and then you said African cousins. So again, I'm assuming you're talking about here in North America. Are you talking about India, for example, China, where we know they have dark, black ethnic groups there, documented, archaeologically documented, but say they are Indian, say they are of various ancient Chinese, ethnic groups. But when we start looking at DNA, the goat rider, that footprint, if they travel from Africa into Asia, or Africa into Asia and back, that footprint will be left in DNA. So I'm just assuming you're talking again about indigenous here in North America, accepting African cousins, but they would have to have a DNA link. They would have to have a blood footprint. Now we go back to the beginning of time. Somebody said, okay, we go back to the beginning of time. We all came from the same place. That's not true. Science has now proven that. Humanity came from the motherland. That is science. The human species evolved in the motherland. But you got all these other hominids out there, which makes your usage of the word caveman, suspect, today, especially if you want to use it around racial, inflammatory purposes. Then we were all caveman, except for the human. That's what's being implied, right? But the human came out of the motherland. So when we start looking at North America, we got to be clear about who the ancestors indeed really are. So can a North American have ancestry from both the continent and, even Asia, the Bering Strait? Absolutely, but that's going to leave a footprint in the DNA. We're going to end in about 9 minutes, so I see your eyes batting, Oloye.
My eyes what?
Now you can blame it on technology and say it was a glitch in the camera, but your eyes batted for a minute there, like you went into sleep for about 2 seconds and then came back.
Oh no.
Oh, okay. And I wouldn't blame you because that's me. I've been up since about 4 o'clock this morning.
Yes, I have to.
Yeah, I've been battling for a family.
Oh, okay.
And I can't give a whole lot of detail because of the nature of the family. Let's just say it's legal, it's judicial.
Okay.
The feds are involved.
Okay.
One party's already incarcerated, facing a lot of time. They're harassing the mama, they're harassing the sister, they're harassing the sister's boyfriend. The person who's already incarcerated has a child on the way out here. And so it's just
a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, with 5 different, spirits to address. It's why I'm so stiff, y'all, with these wannabe practitioners, these wannabe psychic readers. We dealing with some real stuff, real issue, life on life's terms. People really going through a challenge. People really going through a struggle.
Find yourself a real priest, whether it's what would you guys be in Louisiana Voodoo?
Priest, practitioner.
Okay.
We, of course, because of our culture, we weren't given that opportunity to sort of legitimize title positions. Even queen is a new concept. No one used that word back in the day. That's a new thing in both Louisiana Voodoo, but also in New Orleans Mardi Gras culture.
All right.
Once upon a time, all a woman could be was a squaw in masking, black masking culture in Mardi Gras Indian culture. Queen came about the 70s, maybe going into the 80s, but took up prominence in the 2000s, really. So mama, papa, uncle, aunt, these were more than just familiar language. This was more than just, oh, that's my play aunt. That's my play cousin. they were titles for us, and so they worked to mask at another level who our leaders were, who our practitioners were. Because master might think, oh, well, she, that nigga called any black woman he gonna call, mama. He gonna call baby. He gonna call sweetheart. But back in that day, those words meant something. Mm-hmm. So even today, you come to New Orleans, people gonna call you baby. Mm-hmm. I had never been called baby by a man before until I came to Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And many of you know I'm of the 5 genders, so I'm not talking about anything gay. I'm talking about I had never been called a man, but by a heterosexual man, stranger who didn't know me, who wasn't trying to do anything, baby. I was like, what? But they call everybody baby. And it's, yes, it's a term of endearment. It can be a term of respect. In the moment, it can say, I'm safe, you're safe, I see you, you see me, we good. But in 2 seconds, you can become anything, any other name, mm-hmm. any other title. You can become a nigga. In 3 seconds, you can become a nigga based on your behavior. Mm-hmm. But you're going to be aunt, uncle, ma'am, sir. You don't get a lot of ma'am, a lot of sir, but you might get auntie, you might get uncle. I know some of you younger listeners think that's a new thing. Unc is not new. Auntie is not new. Mm-hmm. It's not new. Yes, that's a loaded question in the private chat, beloved cousin. That's a loaded question. So I don't know if I should answer that live on air or not.
No.
Okay, I won't. Okay, yeah, I'm very familiar. That person once upon a time was located here. So your question suggests they might be located somewhere else. So I wasn't sure if that was new, if that was old, if that was somebody who might have went back to somewhere else. So yeah, we'll talk about that off air.
Biggest thing is just to find a legitimate priest, a legitimate, whether male, female, it doesn't really matter. There are legitimate, strong, powerful female priests, just like there are proficient, powerful male priests. Mm-hmm. Take the time to do some research and to make sure that whoever it is that you're dealing with, you feel that you have the ability to trust them, because your spiritual life is a very important life. And when you put yourself out there and you allow somebody to be going and delving in deep, when we do readings, we can go relatively deep if we're proficient enough. And if you allow somebody in there and they go in there and they're not on the right, spiritual alignment, then it could cause you some problems. So take the time and find, do some research. And if you have people that are already working with people, go to that person first and then ask them, do you have a list of people that, I can go to? Of course, you have Divine, you can go Otun. Otun is doing things on a limited basis right now. But you have people on this chat between them that are extremely powerful in what they do. So take advantage of it and see Divine, see Otun, and I believe that you'll be able to get great people to work with you legitimately.
Let me say this, and then I'm gonna let Otun respond. Listen, I don't refer people easily. I just don't. Mm-hmm. I get the emails, which depending on how you word your email, I may or may not even respond. But let's say you are a client. Let's say you are, a customer. Let's say you on the phone with me in the middle of the consultation, and you then say, well, can you refer me to A, B, or C? I'm not quick to refer people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first layer is, okay, you know, well, I'm interested in Ifa. I'm going to refer you to Oloye. If you're a woman, I'm going to refer you to Otun. But if I find you to be a problem, me personally, I'm not talking about other folks' protocols. I'm talking about mine. I'm not going to refer a problem to my cousins. I'm not going to refer a problem to the next person. You understand? And let's compare it to, like, let's say psychiatry, you know. So you got a client who's clearly got some kind of mental health issues. Let's say the client flips out and they got to call security, you know, and you know, get them under restraints, and the police come, and of course they know they got a mental health, and in the best case scenario, you know, it's dealt with and they're quietly sort of led off the premises, and that person now can go and seek out another practitioner if they choose on their own to get further service. Now, would that first professional psychiatrist or psychologist refer that problematic client to someone else? Perhaps. Well, I know Dr. Johnson over there is a little bit more qualified to handle paranoid schizophrenia or certain types of behavior. Perhaps. But when we start looking at voodoo, spirituality, and religion, and again, this is my opinion. If I've talked to you and I've spent time with you, and okay, I know that you're not willing to address, you're not willing to see, you're not willing to do homework, you're not going to follow direction, you're not going to remain consistent, I am going to be very hesitant, if at all, not refer that client to someone else. Now, I might refer them to someone outside the system. I might say, please go see your doctor. Go see your therapist. Go talk to your physician, you know, and then adjust. But I'm not as quick to refer people in that way who are going to indeed be problematic. We're going to end. We certainly appreciate your 2 hours or more of time and energy. Thank you, Locked In, A Divine Journey. Thank you so much. We certainly appreciate you watching us in archive and enjoying the show at any of the platforms that we're available. Thank you. We certainly appreciate the soulmate topic is really kind of still ongoing. We've just been sort of talking about family here lately, soul families, and then that led to family reunions. And then, of course, that July 4th and that Juneteenth energy is still kind of lingering in the air. So it's sort of been an ongoing topic, locked in the divine journey. But we certainly appreciate you enjoying it, participating in it, receiving it in archive. We certainly do. We will be back again on Wednesday, provided everyone's schedule allows for it. Yeah, we will be back on Wednesday, the 14th, July 14th, at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time. I've been considering going back to, I'm almost hesitant to even say this out loud, going back to a 5-day schedule. I just don't know how that's going to happen. I know it's a lot on me. I can imagine it's a lot on Otun and Oloye. I don't know to what degree any of us are prepared to do this 5 days a week for this length of time. I still am considering maybe throwing in a random show on the weekend, you know, or something like that. I don't know. But right now I can assure you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, routinely, consistently, and we'll continue our discussion about family and about family, soul families, and about family connections and relationships. So I appreciate you, beloved. Thank you kindly. Otun, beloved, you can have the floor, and then we'll close out.
This discussion has been wonderful. I truly look forward to continuing the discussion with family reunions. And yes, everything always ties back to doing the shadow work. And then hopefully those watching and listening will be able to see the importance and the connection of that, because it all ties back in doing that shadow work, because you cannot go any further until you handle some of the situations and things that require our attention before we can grow, before we can move forward, before we can elevate. So I certainly appreciated the conversation today. I hope that it resonated with someone and locked in the journey. I believe the name was Everything Happens for a Reason. There is no such thing as coincidence. And you woke up at that time, you were supposed to hear that communication. There are times when spirit wants our attention, and whether we understand it or not, is going to get it. So I give thanks to Ifa that something resonated. And hopefully, if you have questions, always ask, say a prayer. You know, hey, make this clear. I know I certainly asked a lot of the times. So I look forward again to connecting with you all on Wednesday. And if you need any one of us, Divine has given you the contact information. And I do welcome the contact. I am here of service to the community. And hopefully we'll be able to help, if not refer you absolutely to someone that can. So love and light to everyone, and blessings on a wonderful day.
All is truly and indeed a blessing, for sure. Oloye, close us out. You have the last word.
Ashe. So I give honor and I give thanks for the conversation today to all the ancestral spirits that are manifested within all of us, that have allowed us to be able to share with each and every one of you today. May the ancestors be there for you, with you, through you, over you. May Ifa, may the Creator and the ancestors always be manifesting all good things within you, through you, and for you. And so as we leave here today, let us leave here in peace, in solidarity, so that we can receive the sweet things in life. So give thanks. I give prayers to each and every one of you. May Ifa continue to bless and keep you all abundantly. Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. Ashe. Ashewa.
And Odabo.
Odabo.
I'll see you next time. High noon, US Central Standard Time. Same place.
Ifawole.
Centuries before our